from Seoul. We can now bring in our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, this election is all about drawing a line following the political uncertainty we've seen in South Korea over the past 6 months or so.
Yeah, basically South Korea for the last 6 months, and also coinciding with the first 6 months of Donald Trump's term in the U.S., right, and the chaos that has engendered across for many people looking around across the world. It has had a revolving door, a series of these lame duck interim presidents, interim leaders, if you will, while leading up to this election. Why? Because this election has been seen as a referendum on the disastrous administration that preceded it. The former president basically was ousted, was impeached in April, but before that, back in December, had declared martial law. Perhaps the most disastrous thing a president could do in the context of South Korea, because that declaration itself, aside from drawing, armed soldiers to the doors of Parliament, also triggered very, very dark memories of one of the darkest episodes in South Korea's modern history. The literally sort of the dictatorship and the uprisings of the 1980s, which was only ended really relatively recently, 1987, when you had the first sort of democratic elections in the country's modern history. So this martial law declaration cast a giant pall over the entire campaigning process. And like I said, it was seen as a referendum. So observers, Korean observers, they will tell you that it's almost more about, yes, Lee won by a landslide, but this is a man who is also, he had a criminal record. He had a lot of legal jeopardy going against him. There's still questions over, whether or not he might continue to face trials on certain charges. But overwhelmingly, what really buoyed him throughout this campaign was the fact that he was the opposite of what came before him. That is, he was not the president who had declared martial law. So it's as much about the failings, in a sense, of the previous administration under the previous president, Yoon Suk-yeol, than about his own record. He didn't come out with any, major headline-grabbing campaign promises. It wasn't really this inspiring agenda that led this, highest turnout in nearly 3 decades of Koreans to go rushing to the polls to vote in this election. It was really desperation to draw a line under the turmoil of the past, which is not to say that Korea is united. Far from it. It's a very sorely polarized, cliched word, but very true in South Korea's case. Very, very polarized, very, very divided between generations, ideologically as well, young and old. So it's really, he benefited from being in the right place at the right time, because remember, he was a failed presidential candidate in the past.
Doug, South Korea is an Asian engine, one can argue, isn't it?
Post-war miracle.
And at the same time, it's grappling with an increasingly aggressive North Korea and a United States under Donald Trump. So whoever comes in next is going to have a lot of work on their plate.
Let's add China into that as well, right? I mean, let's make it even more complicated while we're at it. Look, it is right now in between a geopolitical rock and a hard place, this incoming president. Why? Because, yes, we are living in a chaotic, turbulent time right now. Yes, a lot of it has been engendered, like I said, by the trade wars, the trade policies of Donald Trump. The tariffs have been a real burden and weight and threat, Damocles' sword, if you will, looming over, hanging over Asia's 4th biggest economy. This is a heavily export-driven economy, and the types of tariffs, the cars, the steel, the aluminum parts that Trump has slapped heavy levies on, all of that is obviously going to have a big downside on the South Korean economy if not managed savvily. And at the same time, how do you counter that? The next president doesn't also want to make an enemy of China, right? Because China is one of the biggest trade partners, or has been one of the biggest consumers also of South Korean products. But how do you do it? Like I said, caught between a geopolitical rock and a hard place. And what I really immediately mean by that is you have Donald Trump telling South Korea, watch out, don't get too chummy with China. You might suffer the consequences if you do. Basically trying to foster a policy of hostility to China among would-be U.S. allies. And at the same time, knowing that you have to sort of reach out to China. He was attacked for this, by the way, by his rival during the campaign as not being enough pro-U.S. And being 2, in a sense, pro-China. It's almost a damned if you do and damned if you don't. And you mentioned North Korea and its constant, persistent, ever-looming, ever-growing, it seems, nuclear threats. That isn't going away either. And this is another policy where the Democratic Party, the liberal party of Lee Jae-Myung, the seeming victor in this election right now, with regard to he's more inclined to try to make bridges, to draw as difficult a time as it is right now between South Korea and the North, and it doesn't look like there's any reconciliation visits coming up on the near horizon.
Yeah.
But he is more inclined, in fact, much more inclined than his rival Kim Moon-soo would have been, the conservative, his conservative challenger, apparently defeated here, much more inclined to reach out to the North rather than sort of isolating it and ignoring it altogether. So very different policies. How will he be able to juggle all of these policies against the backdrop, obviously, of the domestic here and now of South Korea's economy, the high unemployment, especially among youth, right? The very stagnant to anemic growth in what is Asia's 4th biggest economy. Suicides are very high there. Birth rates are among the lowest in the world right now. And wherever you look, housing crisis, cost of living crisis. I know these terms all seem cliche. Don't you say this about every election where they're facing economic challenges? It's true, Delano, yes, but in South Korea's case, it really, really hits home right now. The economy coupled with the very difficult geopolitical climate and the competing and vying camps here is going to make it extremely hard. It would be hard in the best of times, and South Korea is an extremely polarized and divided nation right now.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that, Douglas Herbert there.